Well, hello everyone. We're changing up our studio over here, so hence we don't have the normal backdrop that we have. But I just wanted to, tonight's guest, well, actually, I'm reviewing his video, is Dr. Huberman, and quite the guy. Dr. Huberman has a podcast called the Huberman Lab. And I really appreciated his latest podcast. Back about 2 years ago, I felt that somebody might have heard this in one of the podcasts, that I wasn't very happy with the guest he had, because the guest was not quite right on some of the light property stuff. So, but tonight, I would say I pretty much agree with most of what's said here. It's very, very well done. This podcast, I'm actually going to divide it over two podcasts, because I think there's so much good information here that I think that it needs to be spoken of and reviewed. And I think it needs to get out there, because people need to know this. So the podcast is called Huberman Lab. So we'll have this posted as well. And it's hosted by Dr. Andrew Huberman, and he's a neuroscientist and a tenured professor in the Department of Neurobiology, and by courtesy of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Stanford School. So I think you're really going to enjoy this, and we're going to get right onto it. And we may cut the questions very short. So definitely get your questions into the chat, and we'll try and do our best to come to them, get them. And if we don't get to them, we will copy them and try and get back to you on it, because this is going to be a longer lecture tonight. So tonight's review will be of Dr. Huberman's podcast. And he's a great guy, and I really appreciate this being able to do this. It's basically a review of his video that he just posted about a week ago. And the one thing about it is I've been talking for years now about the light penetration into the body. Because we've done all sorts of measurements over the last 18 years. And it's been really hard as far as people believing that light can penetrate. And so one of the demonstrations I do real quickly is this one, where I show the red light actually goes right through my hand. You can see it there coming right through my hand, right? And yeah, it starts getting less. You can't see it here, but it's still coming through. Now, if I take a meter, and the reason I want to do this at this point in the podcast is because the podcast will be talking about light penetration. And I just want to show you folks, this is quite an expensive meter. This and the sensor alone is over $2,500. So this sensor here picks up just through that little window, and the rest of it is all aluminum. And so it's only picking up through that sensor. So when I put my finger over it, you can see it's dropped right down to microwatts, millionths of a watt. Okay, if I shine it up in at the light up there that's giving us light for my face, we got 265 microwatts. When I put my finger over top of it, it drops way down to only 3.2 microwatts. So even the light from up there is getting through my finger, which I totally have been able to show a lot of people. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this light sensor on the back of my hand, and I'm going to put it in there. And now what's happening is, as I get closer to the light up there, you've seen it went up to 80 microwatts. As I come down, it's less. If I put my other hand in front of it, no, I'm not a magician. I'm just blocking some of the light, and you can see it drop down. And the thicker my hand is, the less that's getting through. But it's still going through both of my hands. So that's the light from the room. When you have the right wavelengths, so that's 0.03 microwatts. When you have the right wavelengths, this is the red wavelength. And see, as I get closer to it, you see it's going up and up and up. Now it's up to 6, 8 microwatts, 10 microwatts right there is what I'm reading. And that's with the light sensor inside my hand, cupped in there, pushed in hard. So it's not getting any light from anywhere else, like it's not coming around the back of the hand or anywhere else or coming through my fingers. It's strictly coming through my hand. So when I go to the red wavelength, you can see it jump up to 19.9 microwatts. When I go up to, or around there, when I go to the other wavelength, which this is the Palm Ultimate right now. So there you go. There's the 19. Okay, 20. If I go to the 810 nanometer, I got 160 microwatts being measured now going through my hand. So compare that 18 with the red, and now I'll switch it to the near infrared, 150 microwatts. So you're talking 9 times the power coming through. So that's how the light can go through. Now, I don't want to gross you guys out, but I've done this where I've actually put the light sensor inside my mouth at the palate of my mouth and been able to get some measurements with my helmet. So if we just move this guy around a little bit, just take me a moment. Oh, we're just caught up here a little bit. Okay, if I take my helmet, there we go, and I bring that thing around. Thank you. There's another set of hands. Thank you, Sam. That's Sam in the background. He's the one who's responsible for the podcast not going out right away. Sam. Anyways, what I could do is I could put that sensor inside my mouth. And man, with that, I should have prepared for that. I need a little. You want to find me a little plastic baggie? I think this would be fascinating for the folks to see this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it for you. You're going to see the readings with this inside my mouth, okay? And so we'll do that in a minute. But I'll show you one other thing. And I've been doing a lot of research to try and find something for you guys that are really techno folks that want to do something like this and do their own experimenting. Thank you very much. This is a meter, and a person can buy the solar cell. Now, it gives you a fairly decent idea of how much light is coming through. I've been able to put this inside my mouth and get readings inside my mouth with this little device here. Now, the levels, I'm going to try this live. So anyways, this whole cost of doing this little test here is about $40. So anybody who really wants to get into the science of this and be really nerdy, and try the light sensor on different parts of their body could do this. So what I'm doing is just putting the sensor. I really don't want to put the sensor inside in my mouth. I don't like, anything happening to my sensor. Probably contaminants inside this is a fresh, clean bag for you guys. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put this inside my mouth on the upper palate, and you'll see the numbers drop way down. Mm-hmm. So you just saw it go up to, what was that, 130, whatever microvolts, microwatts. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch back to the red, and then I'm going to switch to the near infrared. Now you guys can't really see the near infrared. You might be able to see the glow, but you'll see the numbers go way up. So what you saw there is the red light was going right through my skull and through my forehead and some through the eye sockets, right through to the palate of my mouth. Now, I can't tell you how many microwatts are needed, or if it is even that, it might be much lower than that. But if how much is needed to actually have a biological effect. But I just wanted to show you that light's possible to penetrate the skull. Now, in this video that I'm going to present, challenges that the fellow, Dr. Jeffries, I forget his last name, he said the light went right through the body. And for the very best, with the most sensitive equipment I have, I put my very powerful Dr. Glen Jeffery, put the very powerful light mini canopy on the front, which is like, compared to the sunlight in that region, in that band, you're probably talking maybe, I'm going to say 40 to 60 times, if not more, energy that's in that little narrow band that can penetrate. So I did 6 compared to the sun. And he said that he could do measurements on the with the light through his body or through somebody's body, and they could measure it on their back. I think they had an issue with light creeping around the outside of the skin around the sensor. So if I took this accurate sensor that I have and I put it in my hand and I say, look how much light is going through here, and yet I have light coming around here, around that whole area, that could totally throw off my measurements. And I think that's what happened, is they were getting measurements of light coming this way, which would seem to think that when you're holding that to the light, then the light's coming through here. But I really think it was just light sneaking along the layers of the skin, which can travel sideways that way. And I did a test many years ago with that, and I found that happened. So anyways, that I just thought I'd show you that. So it's just, so if I put that back through my hand, you can see the same thing again. So there's the red light coming through, and we got 18, and there's almost 10 times more light coming through on the near infrared in this case. See, 18, 185, there's over 10 times the light coming through at the 810 nanometer. So light can very much penetrate. Now, I'll just demonstrate this for folks this is a real human skull. We're very, very thankful to Alfred. I've given him the name Alfred, and I'm very thankful that he dedicated his life to science. Now, this is only the top half of Alfred, so you can't really identify who it was. So we're okay there in the medical realm. Anyways, so what I'm going to do is, first off, I'm just going to show you, here's the light going through the skull. It's pretty neat how that light can go right through the skull. If I switch it to the 810 nanometer, you just see that glow. So it doesn't, you can't really tell. You can't see the same thing with the 810. But what I'm going to do is now I'm going to take this sensor that I have and put it on the inside on there. Okay, you see it like that? Okay, I'm going to turn it around. Okay, there it is there. Turn it around. And now what we're getting is light from the light from my light over there, 1.8 microwatts coming through. So if I bring my red light along, see, as I get closer and closer and closer, to the skull, there's more and more light coming through. So at this point, I've got, let's say, pretty much the highest, if I get it right over the right area, I've got about 2.5 milliwatts of power coming right through the skull. So you can see that there. I got the sensor on the back there. So there's 2.5. And then when we go to the near infrared, okay, there's the red, and here's the near infrared, and we're seeing 10.5 milliwatts coming through. So 4 times the energy right now, but that totally depends on where I put this in the skull. There's different amounts, because I know that there was some areas that, I'm even getting as high as 10 times the amount of energy coming through. There you go. I'm already higher. I just haven't played around with it. But so the near infrared, the moral of the story is the near infrared of 810 nanometer penetrates much deeper. And so that gives you an idea. And I don't have my super palm here to show you the same type of thing, but you see the higher penetration with the super palm. So I thought you'd find this interesting, but now what we're going to do is we're going to get into the actual podcast. And if you'd like to start playing it with putting me in the corner of the video, then we'll just verify that that's all going to work.
My guest today is Dr. Glen Jeffery, a professor of neuroscience at University College London. In today's episode, we discuss how you can use light, in particular red, near-infrared, and infrared light, to improve your health. And no, not just by getting sunlight. Although we do talk about sunlight, Dr. Jeffery's lab has discovered that certain wavelengths or colors of light can be used to improve your skin, your eyesight, even your blood sugar regulation and metabolism. Dr. Jeffery explains how light is absorbed by the water in your mitochondria, the energy-producing organelles within your cells, to allow them to function better by producing more ATP. He also explains how long wavelength light, things like red light, can be protective against mitochondrial damage caused by excessive exposure to things like LED bulbs and screens, which of course we are all exposed to pretty.
Okay, at this point, I just want to clarify something, because it kind of gets a little washed if you don't know the terminology. So there's when we talk about longer wavelengths, we're usually talking about red or into the near infrared band. That you can that's what penetrates 810 or 1050. Those are longer wavelengths. Well, yes, that's the longer wavelength is 810 or 1050 compared to 660. But they just finished talking about the sun. So in this case, the sun has wavelengths right into the UV. So anyways, right out into the UV spectrum. So UV is really short wavelengths. So anything longer than UV would be a longer wavelength. So blue would be a longer wavelength than UV. As you go through the different colors of the rainbow, the wavelengths keep getting longer and longer. So this is a little confusing for some folks, because he will say longer wavelengths. Well, yeah, near infrared is far longer than red, and red is far longer than blue or UV. So it's that continuum of light that he's talking about. And the other thing I feel that they kind of don't clarify enough is that there's red spectrum. Okay, so there is blue color and other colors, but the red is where you really start getting penetration. And then he gets into the near infrared, talks about near infrared, but they kind of just say it's a longer wavelength into infrared. And usually when I'm talking about infrared, I like talking about infrared far infrared is long wavelengths, really long wavelengths, and near infrared is the wavelengths that are really close to red. So you get more penetration with the red, and or near infrared, 810, 1050, But once you get to 1350, which is even a longer wavelength, obviously, than 810 or 1050, all of a sudden the penetration drops dramatically, like really drops off. So there's no penetration after 1350 nanometer, which is a longer wavelength than 810. So there is this sweet spot where we're going from red to near infrared, 810, 1050, and then well, I'm kind of going off the screen here, but you got the red near infrared 810, 1050. By the time you get to 1350, it just very quickly drops off. And that's where you're talking about far infrared. So here we go ahead. I think this will add to clarity.
Much all day long nowadays, and simple, inexpensive, and even zero-cost ways that you can get long wavelength light exposure, and again, not just by getting more sunlight. He explains that long wavelength light can actually pass into and through your entire body, and that it scatters when inside you. Now that might sound scary, but it's actually a great thing for your health, because that's how long wavelength light can improve the health of all your organs, by entering your body and supporting your mitochondria.
Okay, so again, when he starts talking about penetration right through the body, I've read up on Dr. Jeffery's work. I'm a little concerned about this whole thing about penetrating right through the body. Although I've seen deep penetrations, I have not been able to measure anything through an entire body going in. So just to let you know that that part, and the other part was. So the sunlight having the wide spectrum, again, on the red and near infrared is really what's penetrating, and he calls it longer wavelengths. So it's just kind of a little bit of a muddle. Go ahead.
Believe it or not, certain wavelengths of light can actually pass through your skull into your brain and help promote brain health. During today's episode, we also discuss new findings that correlate the amount of sunlight you're exposed to with longevity. Those are very surprising findings, but they're important. Also, why everyone needs some UV light exposure. And we discuss whether it's important to close your eyes when using red light devices or in red light saunas, and how best to apply red light and things like infrared light in order to derive maximum health benefits. Dr. Glen Jeffery, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We go way back. Later, I'll tell a little bit of the story and why it is truly unforeseen that we'd be sitting here talking about what we're talking about. But it's great to see you again. And I'm super excited about the work you've been doing over the last few years, because it's completely transformed the way that I think about light and health, light and mitochondria. And frankly, every environment I go into now, indoor or outdoor, I think about how that lighting environment is impacting my cellular health, maybe even my longevity. So if you would be willing, could you explain for people a little bit about light as, let's say, the visible spectrum, the stuff that we can see, and the stuff that's kind of outside what we can see, as a framework for how that stuff impacts our cells? Because I think without that understanding, it's going to be a little bit mysterious how it is that lights of particular colors, wavelengths as we call them, could impact our mitochondria the way they do. But with just a little bit of understanding about light, I think people will get a lot more out of our conversation.
Yeah, sure. We think about light purely in terms of the light we see, and that's perfectly natural. And the light we see runs from deep blue, violet, out to pretty deep red, deep bicycle light. And that's what we see. That's what we're aware of. The trouble is that actually there's a lot more of it than that. The sun kicks out a vast amount of light that we don't see. So let's say the visual range is, just grab the numbers, which is say 400 to 700. That's our spectrum.
Nanometers.
Yeah, nanometers.
And there we're talking about the wavelength, how bumpy those wavelengths of light are.
Sunlight extends out almost to 3,000 nanometers. Just think about it. Big, big range. And then that's in the infrared. And on the other end, the bits that we don't see, the deep, deep blues and the violets, that goes down deeply to about 300 nanometers. Now, this is a continuum. We parcel it up because there's bits we see and there's bits we don't see. You can think about it as a continuous wavelength, and the wavelength gets longer and longer and longer as we go out into the deep red. So short wavelength lights, the ones just below blue, they're very, very high frequency. They carry quite a kick. And that's why when you're sitting in the sun and you get sunburn, it's mainly because of those ultraviolet short wavelengths that are present. And then you go beyond our visual range, beyond 700, and the wavelengths become very, very long. And they carry a certain kind of energy, but they don't carry the kick. So the important point to think of is when you go out in sunlight, you see all these colors, blues, greens, reds, but there's so much out there that you don't see. And we thought probably you didn't need to be aware of. But nearly all animals basically see this visual range that we have.
Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, right?
Yeah.
We can separate those out by shining light through a prism.
Yeah.
I think the cover of the Pink Floyd
Dark
Side
album.
of the Moon album.
Yeah.
And that's separating out the different wavelengths. You say that the short wavelengths have a kick. I want to talk a little bit about what that kick is. We distinguish between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. And I think for a lot of people, they hear the word radiation and they think radioactive, and they think that all radiation is bad or dangerous. But in fact, light energy is radiating, right? So it's radiation energy. But at the short wavelengths, below UV, they are ionizing radiation. And maybe we could just explain what that means, how that actually changes our cells. Because if we get too much of that, it indeed can alter our DNA.
I think the important point to think about is not only what the wavelengths are, but also how body responds to those wavelengths. So let's bounce back a little bit to, for instance, the sunburn. We're getting sunburnt because the body is blocking those wavelengths. Those wavelengths cannot penetrate very far. So when you're out on a hot sunny day and part of your body goes pink, it's going pink because it's blocking those wavelengths. So the energy is not being distributed throughout the body. The energy is hitting the skin and you're getting an inflammatory response to it. Now, interestingly, we block those from our eye because our lens and our cornea also blocks those short wavelengths. So that's part of the reason why we don't see them. But it's also the reason why, for instance, people get snow blindness, because it's just sunburn on the cornea and the lens. It's recoverable from, but it's very painful.
And with age, some people who get a lot of sun exposure will get cataract.
Yes, yeah.
Which is a kind of the lens becomes more opaque.
It does. And I've heard that described as being the lens being cooked. But in actual fact, I used to run the eye bank at Moorfields Eye Hospital, Eyes for Research, and you can actually open a patient's eyes up when they're dead, and you can look at the color of the lens and you can get a rough idea of how old that person was. So one of the surgical procedures that medics love is to replace a cataract. Take an older person, they've got this thick brownish lens, and pop it out and put a clear lens in, and the instant response in 90% of them is wow.
In the patients.
Yeah.
These are live patients.
Yeah, live patients. It's done under a local anesthetic in older patients. They just go, wow, isn't that amazing? Suddenly they're getting a lot more light in their eye. Because the lens was brown, it blocked a lot of the blue wavelengths. And so they go, everything is very bright. Everything's very sparkly. And it was quite a dramatic response. But the interesting thing is 2 days later, they said, it's gone. And the brain kind of readapts that visual input from the retina. But going back over the literature of replacing cataracts is quite interesting. It tells you actually, quite a lot. Now, when we put those plastic lenses in, we have UV blockers in them so that so you don't actually get a lot of short wavelengths coming through. But there was certainly the response in the earlier days when we didn't have UV blockers of people saying, God, that's sparkly. That's really sparkly.
Yeah, the sparkliness being those short wavelengths, like think of off the top of water on a really sunny day. So I think the takeaway for me is that we should all be protecting our skin against too much UV and other short wavelengths, and we should probably protect our eyes against too much ultraviolet exposure over time. We know that you don't want the mutations of the skin that are, or the clouding of the lens. I mean, you pointed out you can replace the lens, but I think at the same time we need UV, right? I mean, vitamin D production requires UV exposure. Do we know how that works, what that pathway is?
Yeah, we've got a fairly good idea, but I want to just take you back a step, if I may. There's some really fantastic work coming out at the moment where a few dermatologists are reevaluating the issue of sunlight on the human body, and the leader of that is a
I just want to say at this point, there was one thing I wanted to mention is that we've had a few people now that have had cataracts in one eye, in both eyes, and they've had surgery on the one eye. Now, I just spoke with an ophthalmologist today, and she told me that that she has never seen a case where you take the cataract out of one eye, replace the lens, where the other eye gets better on its own. Usually it's a surgery on one eye. They do one at a time, and then they do the second eye. In this case, we've got two people now that within, it was like 2 months of using the light, and that's 1 minute of the red, like this, with the palm device, and 1 minute of the near infrared. And in both cases, and there's not just those two, but some others, their cataracts have disappeared in the eye that didn't have the operation. So they ended up with their lens clearing right up. So I think you'd find that fascinating. So that's why I want to stop it at this point. But let's continue on.
Character called Richard Weller from Edinburgh, and he's going back over all the data. And Richard's coming out and saying, all-cause mortality is lower in people that get a lot of sunlight. And his argument is that the only thing you've got to avoid is sunburn. The mutations of DNA are occurring really when you've got very, very high levels, not when you've got relatively low levels. And Richard's work has been terribly interesting because he's dug out all the little corners, all the little things that you think about 3 days later. He's dug out all those little corners. And, things like Aborigines in Australia don't get skin cancer. White people there probably are in the wrong place given their evolutionary stage. But
high levels of skin cancer in Australia.
In the Caucasian population.
Yeah. But maybe they're getting too much sun exposure too fast. The UV index is very high down there.
Yes,
I will say.
Exactly.
You can, you
feel it.
You feel it.
Yeah.
Quote unquote.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I hosted a derm-oncologist on this podcast, Dr. Teo Soleimani. So he's a dermatologist who's also an derm-oncology. So skin cancer is one of his specialties. And he surprised me when he told us that indeed sunburn can lead to skin cancers. Too many sunburns can lead to skin cancers. But that the most deadly skin cancers, the most deadly melanomas, are not associated with sun exposure.
Yes. Yeah.
Those can occur independent of sun exposure, and they often occur on parts of the body that get very little sun exposure.
Yeah.
Like the melanomas will show up. I think Bob Marley died from eventually from one that started on between his toes or something, or on the bottom of the foot. There's a lot to unpack about the relationship between light and skin cancers, and I'm going to chase down the literature trail of this Weller guy.
Richard Weller is very interesting. I think he said he hasn't got any dermatological friends anymore.
Probably not.
But he also pointed out that if skin cancer was directly related with sunlight, then we should find in skin cancer patients, very high levels of vitamin D. In actual fact, they've got relatively low levels of vitamin D. So as you say, that story needs to be unpacked. And what's happened, I think, in the dermatological literature is that we've followed a pattern. Yeah, we've followed an assumption, and it's gone a very long way down the line. And then it's taken a little bit of a rogue to come out and say, hang on, we need to take a step back here. And I think Richard Weller's leading that. And we obviously both have an interest in daylight, but his interest in daylight tends to be focused a little bit more on those blue short wavelengths, whereas I'm at the other end of the spectrum. But I think he's a mover and a shaker.
Great. Well, I'm excited to see where that literature leads. And I'm glad that somebody's parsing, as you said, all the corners of it, because I think we've been fed a story that excessive sunlight leads to skin cancer. And the data on reduced all-cause mortality in people that get a lot of sunlight, I saw a study out of Sweden, looks very, very solid, but more data is needed, clearly.
Yeah,
so
I think that story, there was a story out of Sweden, there was also a story out of the University of East Anglia, and we're talking big numbers. We're talking very big numbers on that. So it could have a lot of points that we don't quite understand yet, but I think the solid thrust of it, and the interesting thrust of it for me, is that all-cause mortality flagships up on that are cardiovascular disease and cancers. It's not the obvious ones that we'd be thinking about. So let's use the term unpacking. That one definitely needs unpacking, but from a public health perspective, that's an important area.
Well, I'm certainly a fan of people getting sunlight both in their eyes and on their skin, although not to the point of burning,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah.
So let's talk about how light impacts mitochondria and other aspects of cellular function, and maybe use that as a segue into the longer wavelengths.
Yeah, sure. That area is expanding enormously. And it's expanding enormously in lots of little pockets, and the pockets weren't always talking to one another very well. The first person that came along and said, look, longer wavelengths are really positively affecting mitochondrial function, was a lady called Tina Carew in Russia, and who was very largely ignored. I think she's still alive. I would love to buy her a glass of champagne, if only because she started it off. She kick-started it off. But she was very much of the opinion that mitochondria absorb long waves of light. Parts of the mitochondria absorb it. And one of my studies to try and pin this down was to take a whole load of mitochondria, put them in a test tube, put a spectrometer on them and a light, and say, what are these guys absorbing? Well, I found the point where they were absorbing the damaging blue light, but I could not find the red. I could not find it. There's a lot of stomping around in the lab. You know, who's made a mistake? You know, everyone passing the blame on. But it changed. It changed because what absorbs long wavelength light? Well, a most obvious one is water. The sea is blue because the long wavelengths are absorbed. So someone came along and said, is it about water? Is it about water in mitochondria that's doing this? Now, when mitochondria make energy, they make energy called ATP, and you make your body weight in that every day. It's a vast process, and you make it as a wheel turns round. Mitochondria have these little wheels, these pumps that spin around, but they spin around in water, nano water. And apparently, I'm not a physicist, nano water is viscous. So one idea, I think, which we have to take quite seriously, is that the viscosity of water is changing as a consequence of long wavelength light that penetrates deeply in the body. There is an increase in the spin rate of the motor that produces ATP, and it gains momentum. Now, that is absolutely fine. I can stick with that one. I think that one makes considerable degree of sense, and it gets us over a problem. Mitochondria themselves are not absorbing long wavelength light.
It's the water that they're surrounded by.
It's their environment. Okay, so I think in the end, when you talk about the function of anything, we tend to focus on that thing, and we don't talk too much about where is it, what's it surrounded by, and how does it influence it. So the first reaction, I think, is that the motor starts to go around a little faster. But then something else happens, which is really interesting, which is we start to make more of these chains that make energy. So let's say mitochondria is a chain, it's a series of things, and electrons are passed along that chain to produce energy. Well, when we give long wavelength light, we find the proteins in those chains, we find a lot more of them. So my analogy is that giving red light gets the train to run down the track faster. That's true. But then something detects the speed of that train and says, lay down more tracks. We need more tracks. So we're finding a lot more protein there that is associated with passing that electron down the pathway to make energy.
Interesting. So it sounds as if long wavelength light via water is actually changing the structure of mitochondria and its function as well.
Yeah, I think I would say it's improving the function, and it's influencing the more mitochondrial proteins to be synthesized. So we've got an immediate effect, and we've got a longer term effect as well.
Well, one thing we know about mitochondria is that they started off as independent bits of biology, and then the eukaryotic cells, which we have, essentially took those in, and they became fundamentally part of the cell, and it's passed on through the genome. So the idea was that mitochondria were separate from our cells at one point, or from cells, and were essentially co-opted by our cells or hijacked our cells, we don't know which. And then now because they share.
Okay, so this is an area that as an engineer and for 45 years, I haven't had anything come together that's very, very deep, very technological, very complicated, that just came together by accident. All of the work that I've done, I would say once in a while I've had, the odd thing that's an accident, such as a motor vehicle accident. They happen once in a while, but nothing that, built a brand new machine or part of a machine properly. If I do something wrong with the power supply and I put too much voltage to it, I see a spark, and from that point on, the part doesn't work anymore. So my theory is that we've been designed, that just like I design things and make it do something or create it for a certain purpose, I'm just using a lot of things that are out there and putting them together because of my knowledge to be able to make a computer, to be able to make a sensor, to be able to make all these different devices, or a palm unit, one of these guys. Okay, it's because of the years of experience that I put all these different pieces, designs together and come up with a light. I feel the same way with the human body, that we're not an accident. We're a very, very strategic, designed, beautifully designed body. I mean, you look at any particular piece of the body, the eye, go down to the cellular level, as they're talking about. Everything is so meticulously put together. And even if you had millions of years, you can't come up with a human body. That's my thinking. I believe we were designed. So I do believe that there's a creator. But in this case, I just thought I'd point that out because it's a part that I wish more scientists, there are scientists out there, but I wish more scientists would come to actually start thinking about this, where the body, where they start realizing that they've been told over and over and over and over again that they just came together by accident. When you look at hardware coming together with software in perfect ways so that all of it works, is something that I strongly believe in. But that's what's given me the passion to make a difference in this world, is something that I believe that God's laid on my heart. So we'll continue on with the podcast here, and just so that you know that I'm not quite a fan of some of this terminology, but we'll let it go.
A genome, mitochondrial DNA and genomic DNA, they're passed along. And it makes perfect sense to me as to why that, if they're really of bacterial origin, which we think they are, that they would be absorbing, or through the water, they would be absorbing long wavelength light because they evolved in water. I think it's worth us just mentioning this business of absorption versus reflection in terms of colors. I think people might find this interesting, that you said, the ocean appears blue because it's absorbing all the red, all the long wavelength light, and it's reflecting back the short wavelength blue light. Red stuff does the exact opposite. Like when we see a red apple, it's doing the exact opposite. It's reflecting the red light back towards us, the long wavelength light. I think most people probably don't realize that. And then we talk about, white containing all the wavelengths. Yes. And black absorbing all the wavelengths, right? That's it. That's the notion. So it's interesting to think about light as either being absorbed or reflected back, and makes perfect sense to me why the mitochondria would absorb the red light. But of course, I'm saying that already hearing the Just So story. So it makes sense once you hear it. Right?
It makes sense once you hear it. And why the hell did we not think about that 5 years ago? Scientists make really big mistakes in the pathways that they follow, and they don't talk about their mistakes, but their mistakes are every bit as important as their great results. Why didn't we think about water? Because our minds were trapped in a certain pathway going down a certain alleyway. And so whatever you think about the water hypothesis, the key point is that improvements in function as a consequence of exposure to longer wavelengths light correlate tightly with what water absorbs, right? So, okay, that's a big one. That's a big one. That is there. We know that's true. You can pull it apart and find there are things called water holes, where there are places where water absorbs a bit more than it does in other places. But fundamentally, the absorption of long wavelength light fits water.
So much of your work focuses on how long wavelength light can enhance the function of cells that are not on the surface of the body. They're not on the skin. They're in the eyes. And now we'll get to these data soon, but you published data that long wavelength light can penetrate very deeply and even through the body. Even when people are wearing a t-shirt, like all the way through the body, and impact mitochondria all along the way. So maybe we should just talk about long wavelength light and how it can penetrate through the skin. You mentioned that UV is essentially blocked by the skin. So if I step outside, for instance, on a nice sunny morning, or even a partially overcast morning, but some long wavelength light is coming through, is it passing all the way through my body and impacting the water and mitochondria of every cell along the way? How is it scattering? I mean, how deep does this stuff go?
Okay, so let's stand you out. Let's strip you off and stand you out in sunlight, 12 o'clock in July. The vast majority of long wavelength light is being absorbed in the body. So what we assume is that it has a very, very high scattering ratio. So the vast majority of that long wavelength light is going to hit inside it's going to get through into your body, and it's going to bounce around.
So it's going to literally go through the skin.
It goes through the skin, and let's take the simple experiment. The simple experiment was you strip people off and you stand them in front of sunlight and you put a radiometer on their back.
Tell us what a radiometer is.
A radiometer measures the amount of energy coming through. Okay. And then we put a radiometer on, we put a spectrometer on your back as well, which tells us the wavelength. So what we get from that, the reading we get from that is that a few percent is coming out the back. Now, we shouldn't concentrate on that. What we should concentrate on is what happens to the rest, because it's not bouncing back from the surface of the skin. Very little bounces back. It's being absorbed.
Amazing.
Okay.
Which is amazing.
Well, it's very interesting.
It makes sense based on the physics of it, but it's amazing, right? That the long wavelength light is actually penetrating our skin, bouncing around in our internal organs, and some's getting out the other side. I think that's going to surprise a number of people.
In any conversation like this, we need to talk about silos, people coming from different angles at a problem. And I have the advantage of Bob Fosbury working with me. Bob was lead for analysing atmospheres on exoplanets with the European Space Agency. He had a lot to do with the European use of Hubble, and a lot of his spectrometers are up on the James Webb Telescope. Now, there are super advantages for having someone from another silo to come in, but there are also really annoying issues as well. So I said, Bob, I really want to measure whether light goes through the body. And he said, we all know that, forget it. It's a waste of time, And I said, you think you know it based on principles of physics. I don't know it. And actually, I don't think you know something until it's published and everybody knows it and can talk about it. So Bob came along and said, it has to, long wavelength has to go through. But it needed demonstrating. Now, the other thing that Bob did pick up on this and did start to get a lot more interested in it, because then he went through his wardrobe and he took different layers of clothing from his wardrobe and put long wavelength lights behind them. So what goes through clothing? And the amazing thing is, long wavelength light goes through clothing.
It goes through clothing.
It goes through clothing.
Any clothing?
Well, if you want to wear rubber, I think not. But if you want to wear your standard T-shirt, I think he used 6 layers. T-shirt.
And does color matter? Like, I'm wearing a black shirt now.
No, makes no difference whatsoever. And the other thing we do not know, and this is terribly important, there's lots of we don't knows here, is this long wavelength light bounces around all over the place. So we've got some long wavelength light sources, and I think I'm shining this long wavelength light there, right? Mm-hmm. And then when I put my...
Okay, one comment here is he is right that near infrared light, usually the 810, will go through fabric easier, but definitely black is black because it's absorbing the red wavelength, and it's absorbing blue, and it's absorbing green. That's why you're seeing my blazer here, or it looks black, but it's actually a dark navy, but it's absorbing all that light. So to use the light, if a person was to use the light through the clothing like this with the red light, I will feel it very, very quickly heat up on the surface. And that means there's a very, very high absorption of red. When it comes to the near infrared wavelength, which is the wavelength you can't really see, you can kind of see it there, the purplish dots, that is going to get through better through the fabric. But my suggestion is always, if you can, to use the light directly on the skin. That way you don't lose 30% of the light through the fabric. Also, depending on the thickness of the fabric, it may eat up all the light, or may eat up 90% of the light. So that wouldn't be beneficial to your treatment. So usually I suggest to people that use it directly on the skin. But we had sometimes people, I mean, when we're at a convention or a particular show and we're doing demonstrations, they don't have the ability to take off their shirt or gain a lot of traction to our booth. But if they use the near infrared wavelength like that, they can get away with it, and it does go through the fabric much better. And we actually get a good treatment out of it. I remember one young woman, this is only a few weeks ago, she treated her knees, and she had thin slacks on of some kind, and she did the light treatment on her knees, and in half an hour, the pain was gone in her knees. So yes, it can go through fabric. I wouldn't recommend it. Put it on bare. I just want to set the record straight. So now we'll get into the questions. There was so much good stuff there. And I just wanted to get into the questions, because we've only got a few minutes here to answer questions, and we're going to try and do this the second part of this, because there's so much more to cover on light and the possible challenges of light that we have right now. So one thing is, Kyle mentioned the light demo is amazing. Do you have this as a web video we can show people and patients? I'm going to have to do that. Okay. We're going to have to edit one and make one, more well done. Because, I was just setting it up on the fly here to show you guys, but yes, we'll try and pull that off. Next question here. And by the way, when he said about light passing right through the brain to the other side, again, I have some difficulty with that. I don't know how. I would love to see them in their lab and to see if I can shoot any holes in it. Maybe not. Maybe there's a way of measuring that extremely low level of light. But I've got some pretty good equipment that should be able to do that. So, but I did show you that I was able to go from my skull through the palate of my mouth. So there is, but right from one side to the other, I don't know. Anyways, but I'm very, very happy that information is getting out there. Because when I first started 18 years ago, I was told that light could only pass a millimeter deep and maybe a couple millimeters. And that was all the effect that we're talking about, like less than a quarter of an inch. And I had to have the biggest arguments with friendly arguments, but with those that were in academic circles that kept saying, no way can you penetrate that deep. Well, when you got a lot of light on one side, the type of light power that we have in our devices, and this is really a medical device. This is not to be confused with all the stuff you see on Amazon and that. So we do have our 3 units. I'll just say quickly, we have the professional, the next one up is the ultimate, and then the super palm. You can find that all out on the website, but the power level that we have is very, very intense. And that's why you can even see it with this bright light that I got in front of me coming right through my hand. So we have the light energy that can go deep into the body. Maybe not as deep as they're saying, but it's very, very interesting that we finally got this conversation coming out from academic circles that light can penetrate quite deep. So very, very happy about this. And I'm so glad that, grateful to Dr. Huberman for bringing this podcast together. So let's see more questions here. So a question came in from James. James, yes, it can cause hair growth. There's no problem. I shouldn't say no problem. If the follicles are dead, then it won't cause hair growth. But if the it's just not growing hair because the follicles are not fed properly, they don't have the proper blood flow, those kinds of things, yes, you can help grow hair with my helmet, or even though with the lower power devices that are out there, you might get some improvement and less wrinkles and grow some hair. Janet is asking, I have had my 1050 Super Palm for 3 years. What should I notice when the 1050 is diminishing as power as the LEDs fail? First of all, the LEDs are of the structure that when they fail, they'll totally die. So they will not, that will be very noticeable. You'll get, let's say if it would, it might be one LED dies. But as far as getting, the other thing is that the LEDs, the way I'm treating them, anyways, the way that I'm treating them with keeping them nice and cool, they will last for an extremely long time. The estimated lifespan of the LEDs that I'm using is like 50,000 hours. And even then, it's supposed to only decrease by 10%. And those are with much higher, those are tests that they can only do by raising the temperature much higher. So they do an accelerated thermal test. And yeah, so anyways, it's pretty crazy that we can keep the LEDs so nice and cool. Well, I got patent pending technology, and that's why we got the way of keeping those LEDs really cool. So they should have an extremely long life. Yeah, so you should have no issues to use that for the next 20 years. Okay. Steve, I like your comment. Anyways, I'll leave that one go. How much light can pass through the body with 630 nanometer? 630 nanometer is even less than the 660. At one point, I did some measurements, and I seemed to see about a 6 times drop in not 6 times the energy at a given depth. So by going between red and 635 and 660. So it's as the wavelengths keep getting longer, from let's say 630, 600s even, it starts increasing. 635 keeps increasing more and more and more, and you get right up to the 810, 1050 area, and then you get over to the 1300 nanometer, and then it just comes crashing down. It's very hard to do when the screen is reversed. So you see that curve coming over and then down, and pretty much all the light is absorbed at that point. Tamara's asking, hydration seems it must be a prerequisite for ultimate mitochondrial spinning the electron chain. Is this a correct assumption? As a matter of fact, it's very interesting that when we do light therapy, people come off just very thirsty. So it's probably a good thing, and they're finding out more and more that the body is we're probably dehydrated in a lot of situations, and that's why we have other problems. So you're probably right, but I don't have enough knowledge to really give a suggestion on that. For protocol with eye health, like to try and help things like cataracts and that, it's 1 minute of the red like this, and if you find it's a little too bright, you can always pull it back a little bit. But basically, 1 minute of the red and 1 minute of the near infrared is what we've been using and seeing good results with. And I've got one of my senior patients has people that have used our light has done a 1.5 years with the light and still having good, the improvement has been lasting. So very, very good. I just want to also say, I say sometimes patients, I'm not a medical doctor. I can't prescribe anything. I'm just suggesting that you could use some light to be helpful. Okay, Michael is asking, Tom, just curious if your company has plans to come out with any new products or updates to your devices in the near future. And yes, we've got some things on the drawing board, and if anybody's purchased a Palm light, we're not improving on the existing Palm lights. They're working very, very well, but we're looking at a special type of oral device. We've got a couple other areas that we hope our devices can be used for. So, yeah. Okay, Steve is asking, will late evening treatment affect sleep, insomnia, or help sleep? As a matter of fact, some find the red light is very helpful. That's again coming to a part of this podcast that you'll be able to see next week, is where he discusses about the blue light and just touches on circadian rhythm. But first thing in the morning, you want those the circadian to help your circadian rhythm is to get the sunlight or more of a blue colored light first thing in the morning, like blue. I mean, like a cool white or cold white, that kind of thing. And then, but definitely in the evening hours, everything after 6 o'clock, you should be looking at red, more of a red color, like a Kelvin, 2,500 kelvins as far as a bulb, or 3,000 kelvins with an LED. There is some challenges with LEDs, and that's why a person really has to go and buy themselves some really good quality bulbs. There's all sorts of junk on the market at the dollar store and that can cause all sorts of problems. So, if you have problems with insomnia, you may even want to look at incandescent light in the evenings. That might, to switch if you can still get the bulbs in your area. Okay. And so can internal physical injury occur by using far infrared? No, far infrared does not, Elizabeth, does not penetrate. So it does not get deeper in. So there's no, and when we're talking near infrared, there's been no issue of getting near infrared into the body, and we've helped all sorts of things. And Wendy, we're going to call this the last question. Wendy, I heard about pulsing of lights for panels. Will you be getting these? We actually do. So we do have pulsing available if somebody wants to do that. Yeah. So the pulse, it's an added feature if you want to get it, but you do need to be cautious when it comes to pulsing the light, because it can influence the brain in certain ways, and people need to know what they're doing when it comes to using pulsing. When it comes to the continuous wavelength that we have, it's been an extremely safe way of doing things. So anyways, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We had a really good crowd tonight, and if you have connections to those that maybe are doing their own, like have larger podcasts, we wouldn't mind sharing the message. I've been invited now on some larger podcasts to get the message out about light therapy and what it can do. So anyways, love to have that. But anyways, I want to wish everyone a fantastic coming week, and during this Christmas season, I hope you can find the real reason for Christmas. Anyways, all the best. Have a great week, and may you be richly blessed.